Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Matt Allen here. I had a request this week to talk a little bit about swim baits. I wanted to take some time and talk to you about how to keep your swim bait fishing simple. There are a lot of baits on the market. There are all sorts of different companies introducing swim baits every year, new baits, new designs, but really you don't need that many baits. You can get into this type of fishing and spend as much money as you want, but you don't have to. You can buy a few simple styles of bait and do very, very well throughout the year. So I just wanted to give you a basic rundown of what I throw during the 4 main seasons of the year, because despite what most people talk about, you can throw a swim bait 12 months out of the year. So we'll jump into it right off the bat. Let's start with the cold winter months. We'll say December, January, February, somewhere around there. Out here in California, we typically imitate trout, but this works around the country because even out here, a lot of our lakes don't have trout in them. So just a couple of options. I throw big baits this time of year. This obviously is a trout imitator. This is a Baitsmith. This one's a Huddleston. But more important than that is the tail design. This style of tail moves differently than a traditional boot style tail. A boot has a great big wide kick, whereas this style of tail just moves a little bit of water. It's much more natural for a lethargic fish in the wintertime months when they're colder, they're not moving around as much. So whether you're imitating trout or bait fish, you want to stick with this natural style tail during those winter months. It will make it very, very simple. Now, something that people don't often talk about in winter is throwing wake baits. Big topwater baits. Obviously, again, this is a trout bait, but it really doesn't matter what color it is as long as it's big. The reason why I say that is in winter, the water's cold, these fish don't want to move. So if you go throwing a little bait over their head, you throw a popper or a super spook or something like that, those fish don't really want to come up for that in that cold water. It's not worth it. But the bigger, the slower the bait, just barely moving on the surface of the water, it's worth it to a big bass to come up and get that meal. So that's another great option for winter. Now branching into spring, that's where I start to change it up. Early spring, the water's still cold. I'll often still stick with this style of bait. This is actually the Huddleston. If you watch the 13-pounder video, that fish was caught in March, and this is the bait that it was caught on. Still got her teeth marks in it, but obviously that's a springtime bait. I start branching into the smaller version of the same thing as the water warms up. These work around the country. It doesn't matter where you live. These baits are not too big for 1 and 2 pounders to eat. But if you have 4, 5, 6, and then even 10 or 12 pounders in your lake, fish will eat these. So that's a great option. Now as the water keeps getting warmer, maybe April, somewhere around there, into May, I start making the switch over to the boot style bait because everything in the water is moving more quickly. The fish are moving around more. The bait, the bass, everything is just willing to move. There's a lot more activity in the water. So you go to that boot to get more bites. The osprey style of bait. And the osprey is an awesome option. That's one that a lot of people don't talk about. There are a lot of companies on the market, but if you just trim it down to a few simple options, you won't waste money buying tons of baits. So if I could recommend one bait for a nationwide angler during that spring, summer, fall transition, it's an osprey style of bait. The osprey 6-inch tournament talon has a hook on top. That's a great one. That's a good bait for people to throw. And then again, topwater, as we're going into spring, as the water starts warming up, the Lunker punker is my favorite bait. It's a big spook style bait, big walk the dog type bait. But again, it's covering a lot of water moving side to side, but it's not moving away from the fish very quickly. It's not going in a straight line. So they tend to be willing to come up and eat it. You catch a lot of big fish on that in spring. As we transition into summer, that's really where you're going to start seeing me throw a hard bait. Now you will notice, as I've been talking about hard baits, everything I'm talking about floats. I very, very rarely throw sinking hard baits. Not because bass won't eat them, but because if you want to play the odds, big bass will eat a soft bait much more often than a hard bait. There's less on a soft bait to show a bass that a bait isn't real. You know, if this is in front of them, there's just one hook. You throw a hard bait in front of them, there's joints. It's hard. If they touch it, it's hard. It doesn't feel right. It's got big treble hooks hanging from it. So unless I'm on top, I typically will not use a hard bait. So during the summer, I'll still throw the Osprey style bait, but I start branching into the smaller wake baits. These are JSJs. I love this style of bait. The Lunker Punker again. And then I also start throwing the swim jig. You've obviously heard me talk about that before, but summer all the way into fall, the swim jig is always on the deck of my boat because it's a great bait fish imitator. As you branch into fall, I still throw the swim jig, but I start going back to more of the traditional boot style baits. Here's just a couple of the ones I throw. This one is actually called the Mat Lures. This is an older Bass Trick style, but again, the Osprey works great. You're still trying to imitate bait fish, whether that's shad or hitch. I mean, it really doesn't matter. Nationwide, whatever you're imitating, gizzard shad, anything, you can throw this boot style. You get a lot of quick movement out of it, and you'll get some of those fish. And then as water starts getting colder, you start going back to winter. Again, you go back to that other style of tail. So if you want to keep it simple, very, very simple, like I said, there are tons of companies on the market, tons of great baits out there. But if you want proven baits that'll get you through the year, I would stick with Huddleston, Baitsmith, Osprey. These are great companies you can use year-round. Now, hard baits, there's all sorts of stuff. The BBZ from Spro, that's an inexpensive bait. It catches fish. The Lunker Punker, the JSJ, those are all baits that I throw a ton, that I catch a lot of big fish on, that you don't have to worry about whether or not you're putting money into a bait that may or may not work. So just to review very, very quickly, warm water, you stick with a boot style bait. Cold water, you go to your more slower action styles. And then in the summertime, you throw hard baits if you want to. In the wintertime, you stick to soft baits. If you do that, you're going to do well. It's not that hard to catch big fish on swim baits. Go out there, throw the baits, have confidence, and you're going to get bites.